Our first question would be, in terms of the legacy that Moog, ARP, and Buchla created, could you summarize how companies like Moog, ARP, and Buchla contribute to the overall modular ecosystem, and what role they played in shaping the development of new models emerging from different formats, like, for example, Eurorack? Anyway.
Everyone's rushing to answer that one. You have to remember in the early days of Moog and Buchla, they basically came into existence because before then, to do electronic music, people were using electronic test equipment, oscillators and filters, that were not intended for music making. So the big thing that Don Buchla and Robert Moog did was talk to these musicians who have been using test equipment and try to make it more of a musical instrument. And that was their big achievement, I think, was taking this idea of this raw electrons and ways of modifying circuits and sound and making more of an instrument rather than just test gear and real experimentation. And that really laid the foundation. Now, the market kind of moved beyond that because they thought they found some easier ways of dealing with synthesis in terms of presets, polyphony, pre-wiring everything behind the front panel. But obviously we've gotten to a mode now the last decade or two where people said, I've got 5,000 presets on my phone, but I want to make my own sounds. And that's caused modular to come back again because I think it's one of the best tools for sound designers to develop original sounds. You can go outside what someone else thinks is the right way to make the sound in your own head.
What are the advances of modular synthesis technology and his main impacts in music, film, and music production? It could be
film, what is it?
Film and media production.
So what do you want to know about that again? Sorry.
Advances of modular synthesis. The advances of modular synthesis, how impact
in film.
In film.
Well, it's had a lot of say in film, and it's changed a lot. Like in the early days of film, we would be out there with the orchestra with modular synthesizers, and we used to use tape to tape up the sliders to know where to go, so we'd get it to the same sound. And then in a cue, you'd have to switch from sound to sound, and we'd follow the conductor. There were no clicks, really. And then we would just make the sounds live and play them. And it's advanced now to where the composer kind of does it. They have a DAW, and they create the sound in there, and then they overdub the orchestra to their sounds. So there's a little bit of musical, I think, loss there, because you don't get as much collaboration. Some composers will bring in synthesizer, programmers or performers, because there's a certain thing to the way you can play a keyboard.
Thank you.
And just to add to the previous, this was a great answer that you gave on the first question. But I just want to make sure that everyone's aware of those pioneer people that built synthesizers back then, Bob Moog, Alan R. Perlman, Don Buchla, Dave Smith, and I don't want to leave anyone out, but those are like the main ones that Tom Oberheim, those were like instrument makers, like the way someone would make like a Stradivarius, Guarnieri.
Yes.
And that, to me, meant a lot. And I think that's why there's an appeal now, because people want to touch something, and a digital instrument, it's like it could have a knob on it, and then you're moving a slider. So it doesn't connect, and that's what an instrument is. It's something you touch. So that's my take on it. I think there's an appeal to like touching something and loving it, and you don't need 5,000 sounds or like 10,000 songs on your iPhone. You just want one that you can love.
Yeah, in that vein, a lot of modular synthesis companies these days are 1 to 5 person operations. So when you get a module, you're getting the personal vision of a particular composer or creator or engineer, as opposed to a committee decision that often goes into more of these keyboard instruments. So, as you say, touching what a creator had in mind is, I think, another part of the appeal of modular today.
And if I can just jump in, still amplifying on that first question, we don't want to leave out Mr. Kakahashi or Mr. Kato from Korg and Roland. They were also, great contributors to the field of first modular synthesis, and then preset synthesis.
The CS80 Yamaha, because that was a great instrument.
Yeah. And I think the other point is that all of those human beings, inventors of these instruments, were really working closely with musicians all the time, and that they saw themselves as instrument makers, not the musicians themselves, even though they could all make music. And I know personally, having worked with Alan Perlman and with Bob Moog and with Mr. Kakahashi, they really cared about how musicians felt about their instruments, not just the sound, but how it felt to interact with them, and you know, how you actually worked with the instrument to make the sound. Just like a guitar player, a guitar luthier would be, you know, concerned about how the instrument felt in the hands of the player.
Could you share a memorable moment or experience in your early encounters with modular synthesis that left a lasting impression in your creative journey? Anyone?
I could, really fast.
Please.
Way back when they were doing the movie Apocalypse Now, they couldn't record the helicopters with the Nagra tape machines without it distorting to get the kind of sound level, sound pressure level, and the low frequency. It was like pinning the meters and stuff. And I was just studying with Clark Spangler. I actually studied synthesizer when I was a teenager, like 13, 14 years old, with this guy that studied with Paul Beaver, who goes back to Bob Moog days. He was one of the first artists making records. And he dragged me onto this session where everybody, like they had like 3 or 4 people, Dan Wyman, people that are kind of legends back then. And we were all trying to make helicopter sounds on Moog modulars and ARP 2600s to like enhance the sound of the helicopters to give you, and it had an impact on me that synthesizers could do more than just play music, because I was, you know, I was switched on Bach. I was thinking, oh, you got to play classical music. Then it led to all kinds of things, into pop and everything. But that stuck with me, that it could be something that you could imagine, like you could heighten reality. Let me put it that way. And that, I like being there in heightened reality.
Yeah, in my case, I was fortunate that I had an older brother who influenced quite a bit of my life. Like, so there's always music in the house. A lot of the family was into music. My brother was into electronics, so I inherited his copy of Popular Electronics magazines. I know other people inherit their brother's porn stash. For me, the electronics were like porn. I had no idea what this does, but I just can't take my eyes off of it. But then he also, in college, his first roommate happened to have an uncle who was doing spots in New York using one of the first Moog modulars. And he brought home for me a reel-to-reel tape of the different commercial spots, things like Italian Swiss, but also Levi's had a commercial for State Press double knit slacks, if you remember those. That was all done on the synthesizer, including processing the voices, so that just really hooked me at an early age. I could have electronics and music and put them together. I mean, that set my career path when I was, you know, less than 10.
So I was first a guitar player, and actually, I was already teaching at Berklee as a guitar teacher and teacher of composition and harmony, and I lost the use of my left hand, and I decided that I needed to continue making music. So I sold all my guitars, and I bought an ARP 2600 and a 1601 sequencer and a 4-track tape recorder, and I rejoined my band playing synthesizer, and I had to invent a role for myself because I wasn't really a keyboard player, and we had a fantastic keyboard player in the band. And we were playing jazz fusion and playing around Boston, and then eventually started touring nationally and internationally. And our management was trying to work on our stage presence because we were really into the music, and we weren't dancing. And so we ended up doing a lot of video synthesis projection behind the band using control signals from my ARP 2600, and which meant that I had to be in the dark most of the time. So I painted all the fader tips on my 2600 with Dayville paint, and I installed a black light in the lid of the case of the 2600. And it looked really cool from the audience because you'd see me moving. You couldn't see me, but you could see these lights moving all over the panel. But the problem was we had 2 drummers in the band, and they were listening to the click from VCO2, which was driving the sequencer that would come in and go out, and the 2 drummers played against the click. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the black light caused the VCO2 to drift sharp, which is a really bad thing if the drummers are using it as a click. I ended up with drumsticks in the back of my head a lot.
Dave, how do you see modular synthesis contributing to the intersection of arts and science, and what potential does it hold for interdisciplinary collaborations?
That's a very deep question. You know, I think of one of the great things about modular synthesis is the way it makes you think about the signal path, right? You have to know what you're doing. You have to connect the output of one module to the input of another. You have to create your audio signal path and your control signal path. You have to be able to modulate modulators, et cetera, et cetera. And in addition to, you know, creating music or sound effects with all that, you're really learning the physics of sound. And so I think that studying modular synthesis, and especially from the science perspective, the acoustics, you know, acoustical phenomenon, the physics phenomenon of sound, is a really interesting intersection between science and music and art. And you know, the Bob Moog Foundation has a whole program called Dr. Bob's Sound School that teaches the science of sound in elementary school to second grade kids, using synthesizers and theremins as a way to get them to visualize the sound and understand the principles. So I think you know, modular synthesis in that sense can be a great intersection between art and science.
Chris, what challenges and opportunities do you foresee in the integration of modular synthesis with emerging fields such as virtual reality, AI synthesis, and AI music-driven generation?
Yeah, I think a lot of us are still trying to figure out, is artificial intelligence or machine intelligence our partner or our competitor? And it's a bit of both. I mean, if you can go back to the 1950s, RCA created the Mark I and Mark II synthesizers to replace those pesky musicians and composers, you know, to generate music for the content they were distributing. And you could also look at Berry Gordy hiring Raymond Scott and Electronium to go ahead and auto-generate riffs that he intended to use to Motown, to again, to not have to deal with those pesky songwriters and musicians. So yeah, AI is coming after some of your jobs, that's true. But one of the ways to keep your job is to be unique and be something that's not just formulaic, which is what a lot of AI is generating currently today. And a lot of us have been using early forms of AI, machine intelligence, for ages inside modular synthesis. You can go back to the 60s and the early generative patches where the instruments would self-play. Douglas Leedy has an album called Entropical Paradise, which is Buchla and Moog systems done as self-generating patches, one patch per album side. That's a case of putting your own intelligence into a machine to generate results based on your desires, but not necessarily individual notes that you're playing. And today in modular synthesis, we have a lot of modules that do automatic note generation, stochastic creation, a lot of so-called Turing machines, which are shift registers that create patterns and do variations on the pattern. And my main sequencer in the modular, the Vector by 512, even has buttons for generate and evolve. And when I get stuck, I need an alternate version of a sequence for the next chorus, I'll use the evolve and go through a whole bunch of different ideas that it generates, but I don't stop there. I have to insert myself back into the loop, cull which ones had promise, change individual notes and phrasing in the ones that it generated. So just like Raymond Scott originally viewed with Electronium, I think modular synthesis and AI is a real chance for collaboration between a machine and the man to extend what we do. And we were talking about this earlier. I think some of the possibilities, I was talking to someone in the hall about this, of AI to go through large data sets and cull down results can be very useful for synthesis. I'm interested in sound modeling. I want to have vibrato shapes that are like how a violinist actually plays, not just a sine wave patched out of a machine. I want attacks that are like how saxophonists plays, not just a simple ADSR. And I'm looking forward to using AI tools to cull through all sorts of samples to say, here's the envelope shapes I want if I want to recreate that particular instrument, and let's start hybridizing from there.
Fantastic.
Can I ask one question?
Please.
Do you think that we could play, like, do you see where you can perform with AI? Like where it responds to you? Like if I do something, then it responds back, and you see that?
I think we'll get there. I was actually part of a hoax presentation years ago at a show called CyberArts, where we had a computer on stage pretending that it was automatically fulfilling people's phrases they played, but it was a musician backstage, actually. Because we wanted to open the conversation.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
We wanted to open the conversation. How do you deal with copyright and ownership if AI starts generating stuff? And we were dealing with that ages ago. I do think that it would be possible to jam with an AI. And already I'm using the tools in my system. Sometimes when I'm out performing, I'll go on the high wire and tell the machine, your turn to come up with the next riff, and I'll have it generate a sequence riff and then interact with that. So I think we'll get there.
So, Anthony, as a composer for film and media, could you share examples, or one example of where modular synthesis play a pivotal role in enhancing the storytelling, the emotional demands of a film, and creating atmospheres that traditional instruments couldn't achieve?
Huge. Well, it enhances so many. Well, maybe unfortunately, I'm credited with coming up with mock-ups, orchestral mock-ups, where you create the score for the director before you go to the orchestra. So I used to do this. The first time I did it for a big film was the first Color Purple with Quincy Jones and Steven Spielberg, and it was like going to Quincy and Steven, and then they were like killing composers because there were like, over 20 composers on that film. So there's positives. I'm bringing up positives and negatives, right?
Yes.
Because that was a use in film of the technology, and we did mock-ups. Now it's gone crazy. But also creating like a sound for a character, or creating like a new instrument where you have, in the movie Blue Thunder and War Games, it was the same director. I did a lot of stuff where I enhanced the string section. And I was out there, but it was done to click. It was one of the first times I was doing click on a scoring stage. And I would have the sequencer playing, and then the string players were like, what is this? Get this guy out of here. But I think it enhanced the characters in the film because it was a movie about a helicopter, in the LA Olympics. And then War Games was about a computer that was going to, cause a nuclear havoc in the world. And Starman, I did a lot of interesting things for the balls and the mothership. And those were the characters. They were important characters in the film. So we create a sound for the character that wasn't part of the orchestra or could be combined with the orchestra. And there's countless examples of it. It's super important in film because film is always stretching sonically, even with the amount of speakers you see now, but sonically to give you, like I said earlier, sort of this extended, enhanced reality experience. And that's what we like about art, I think, is to go beyond. And it really, I think, helps do that. And low frequency, too. Introducing low frequency to the orchestra. Insane. Head turning.
The challenges of performing live on a modular, how do you face those, and what strategies would you present or recommend?
Yeah, it's a large part of modular synthesis culture these days is performing live. And what was in the obituary for modular synths the first time around was that they were unwieldy to use live. That's supposedly why we went to presets and things being pre-wired and stuff like that. And now it seems to be this badge of honor with modular synthesis that they do actually play live, particularly electronic dance music. A lot of it with the modular and performing live, and I do it myself, I have a hybrid system where basically anything that I want to control and manipulate in real time while I'm performing, I do it on the modular. Because the modular to me is the ultimate multi-touch interface, to be able to reach out to all these individual controls and change the timbre or the direction the sequence is going in. So if there's a musical part that's important to me to change during the performance, it's on the modular. If there's parts that are backing tracks, chords, slow arpeggios, effects, I'll offload those to the laptop computer rather than trying to recreate them with another huge batch of modules. So for me, the modular in general, I love the tactile interaction with using modular, but particularly when it comes to performance, you really have to narrow it down to what do I need to touch while playing? I'll go ahead and assign that to the modular. If I don't necessarily need to lord over it while it's playing, I can offload that to a laptop or whatever.
Modular synthesis is known for its versatility and sound design's capability. This could be an endless universe that is always expanding. But at what point do you feel that you have to get to the limit of how to restrict the modular synthesis universe? So at what point do you say, well...
Or do you?
In my opinion, you have to restrict anything to be good, because you can't get, the idea is too crazy. Like, the more, in fact, for me, the more, it can be taken the wrong way, but the more you restrict yourself, the more freedom you have. Like, if I just have a microphone, now I can dance and sing and do whatever with this microphone. You start giving me a bunch of modular synths, now I have to like wonder if it's going to work or anything. It adds levels of complexity.
Yes.
So I think when you're this is your question, when I'm on a modular synthesizer, I want to keep it as, and I do this for anything though, keep it as simple as possible, because it's going to convey the message. Like, what's the whole point of doing it? Is so that somebody feels something. And how many, like David Ogilvy, I did like 1,000 TV commercials, literally close to that many. And I really learned about simplifying the message and keeping it down to like one or two things in a song, in a speech, anything. So I do that with synthesizers. I just try to, like, what's going to have impact, what's going to move the needle. It doesn't mean you don't explore this stuff, but there's a time and a place for it, and then when you perform or the end result, like, what does the listener want, you know?
Yeah, I was going to add on to that. The way I divide it up myself is I have what I call R&D time and then composing time. When I'm doing R&D, I'm not trying to write a song, I'm trying to push the limits of what I can do with the system and then come up with a bag of tricks that's in my back pocket. And when it's composing time, I can pull out of that back pocket rather than go down a rabbit hole trying to make the machine do something.
Yeah, I agree. I think limitations spawn creativity. I mean, when you set limits, then you can get really creative within those limits. If you never have any limits around what you're going to do, then you find yourself searching and searching and searching and never answering. And it's the answers that we're all really caring about.
David, did Stravinsky write Poetics of Music? Is that because I know he has a quote about
Oh, yeah?
saying something similar to that, about more simple that you can be, then the better the piece of music is going to be.
There's an Albert Einstein quote that said, make it as simple as possible, but not any simpler.
Can't beat that.
But I'm probably in the minority that I don't like restrictions. That's why I use modular, so I'm not restricted. But I will divide my time to the unrestricted R&D time. When it comes time to be creative and you're on the deadline, you have to be efficient. That's when you use the shortcuts you've learned from not being restricted with all the possibilities.
Well, simple's not restricting, though. That's two different words. That's for me.
So in the modular integration, the production environments, in the context of music, film, or media production, how do you balance the need for efficiency and tight deadlines with the workflow that modular synthesis offer?
It's faster. I mean, I'll tell you, like if I have a Prophet 5 or a Jupiter 8 or something like that, and I call up a sound and I need to change it, like I look at the panel and it doesn't tell me anything about what's going on. It saves the sound, but when I look at an ARP 2600, it's like I see what it is. So for me, it's much faster when I have to like manipulate a sound like on the spot. I can do it, but then I have to figure out where I am on those others. And on same thing with all the digital synthesizers, you know, like on the screen, you can kind of see where you are, but then you have to get there and change it, and I find modular to be way faster in real time, like if you have to just do something.
Yeah, that's an interesting response, because I hear a lot of composers complain the opposite. The modular is so slow, they don't dare do it on deadline, particularly if they have like a TV show where they're on, hitting a show every week. And they try to pre-program a lot of stuff ahead of time and just leave that on the modular.
Well, they didn't pay their dues in an orchestra with the composer, the guy yelling, the conductor yelling at you, like, where's the sound? You missed the cue. That you pay your dues. Like if you want to be a jazz musician or whatever, so go out there and have to make sounds on the spot or not get paid, and then you get fast on it. But I truly think it's faster.
That's refreshing to hear, because that's not something I hear a lot of people say, so that's great.
Yeah, like we do throwdowns. Like we're going to do more of these on my videos where we battle to see which is faster, and I can win.
Well, and I think that's the point, is that you're viewing it as an instrument that you get to know and that you understand so well and so thoroughly that you can get to what you need really quickly, and especially on an instrument like the 2600 where it's so graphic in terms, you can look at the front panel and know what it's going to sound like. And like you say, with a lot of synthesizers that you have to go digging for parameters before you find the one you're looking for, it can be a lot longer. Sometimes I'll be working with my 2600 and I'll just really quickly make a patch, but then I know I want to get it back again, and I know it's not going to be so easy on the 2600. So then I might just go into a software synth and recreate it, knowing the signal path that I've just created. Then it's really easy for me to recreate it. Then I can save it. Then I can get it every time I want.
That gives me a chill. And Dina Perlman in the house right now, the ARP Foundation.
Give it a round of applause, please.
Really. That ARP 2600 is so close to my heart, and I'm glad that you feel the same thing.
And future trends. Could you predict some trends or areas of growth in modular synthesis? And how do you think that this development will influence the broader world of music, media, film, and sound creation? Predictions.
Take it.
Well, so I have to be honest, I'm really not a fan of Eurorack. Because I find the form factor is really not human scaled. I have fat fingers, and when I turn the knobs, I accidentally touch another knob, and then, just a little bit of turn on the wrong knob completely changes the sound. And so I've kind of stayed away from that. And but recently I've been working with some instrument designers that are looking at a whole new format for modular synthesis using USB-C as the backbone, where USB-C can carry not only the power between modules, but also audio and control signals. So I think there's some really interesting possibilities coming down the road with new instrument designs that are based on a whole different and more modern approach to how you connect things.
I think what's been interesting for me is that so many modules today actually have microcontrollers inside of them, which has really broadened what they can do. It's not just recreating test equipment. And I've just been enjoying the evolution. We've been going from, here's a circuit, let's see if a musician can do something useful with this, to what does a musician want? Let's design a module that can do that for them. And I see we're doing more in the evolution towards now, what do musicians want when they're creating music, rather than, well, here was a circuit, what are you gonna do with that one?
I like Eurorack, kind of. I mean, I use it for sure as controllers for the modular stuff I have, it's like extra stuff. Like I could have a voltage-controlled envelope generator that I don't have on the 2600 or something, and I grab it. I find a lot, a high pass and a band pass filter that I don't have, and that gives me extra stuff, or more mults, or it's pretty useful for that kind of utility stuff. And then there's these modules that come up that are interesting, do weird things, and I mix them in. Like, to me, everything's modular. I use guitar pedals as modular. Like, I'm short of VCA, so I could use a tremolo pedal, and now I have a VCA with a sine wave in it. I've always been that way, and because you never know what you're going to be asked to do, so I carry these things around. And I used to the synclavier. It didn't have a filter on it, so the whole synclavier was an oscillator to me when I would put it into the ARP 2600 to filter it. I just had a polyphonic thing now going in there, so I didn't really care about any of that subdivision, Even with digital, analog, and I'm delivering digital, so it's analog to digital, and it doesn't really matter.
So, as educators, which all of you are, how do you guide the students and aspiring musicians at different skill levels to integrate, explore, and enhance their sound design, music production, and composition skills for music and film using modular synthesizers?
Well, that's a deep question too. Yes.
Yes.
So actually, I think that software-based modular synthesizers are really an incredible educational tool, and that is, we have some online courses that I developed for Berklee College of Music that is, teaching signal flow, the basics of sound synthesis, And one of the ways that you can do that easily is by using a free program like VCV-Rack. And then, you've got a store of modules you can go to, and then you can put them in and learn how to cable them up. And you can do everything in software. The difference is the physical touch, right? But I think that the software is really great for learning, because you can build your own synthesizer, and then you can save that synthesizer, and then build a different modular synthesizer and save that one, et cetera, et cetera. And then afterwards, if you want to perform with a software modular synthesizer, you can always map controllers to the parameters that you want to manipulate in real time, and then you can do it that way. But at least that way you can call up from memory an entire modular system that you've created for that specific piece of music.
Yeah, not to mention it takes up a lot less space and money to do that on the software.
And it's really good for the back.
I do teach a lot of modular synthesis, and my goal has always been trying to close the loop in a person's head of, I hear a sound I want, what knob do I touch, how does that change what I hear, and then closing that feedback loop so you know what to go through on the modular synth. Or a synthesizer in general, just because modular synth explodes everything and exposes all the parts, I think it's easier to teach people, here's exactly what a filter is doing to the wave shape and to the timbre you hear. Here's exactly what a wave filter is doing, rather than being behind glass and trying to figure out what it's doing. So I think modular synths make it easier to understand sound design so that you can go ahead and then apply those skills to whatever you want. And in my case, I treat the modular as my way of making new sounds. I figure if I wanted to do a classic sound, I will do it on an already existing keyboard that already is specialized in doing that sound. For me, modular is a way of coming up with new sounds and sounds people haven't heard or haven't used in a particular application again. So those are my favorite parts of modular, is closing that loop in your head of how to create sounds that you want and also how to create new sounds.
Yeah, and I approach them the same, like digital the same as modular. Like I was saying, it's all the same to me, and it's just pitch, timbre, duration, amplitude, and I look at the digital and I do the same thing, but I just don't have like a thing to touch or whatever. I just go in there and think of it the same way, because again, that just keeps it simple for me, and then I can just make any sound I hear, because that's what I have to do. And I would say practice it though. If you really want to be able to do that, like every day, like make a trumpet, emulate stuff, and then make original things, dream of things, and see if you can nail them, because you can always go off and let it take you down, and that's really fun to do. But let's practice your scales, like, because I learned from a teacher, like I had to practice, and he would make me, I'd come in and in an hour I'd have to make like 30 different sounds that he would call out. So you can really treat them like have pedagogy, like where there's like actual test yourself, practice and test yourself. And then you can do all this stuff, and it won't matter what it is. I think it's the same thought process, because you're making sound, and then if it's going in music, fine. Sometimes it's just goes into the vibe of the room, if you're doing something for fun by yourself with your friends.
Well, just wanted to mention briefly some other platforms also that has been considered modular, the Max or the Kima environment, or Reactor, or Karma, and Bast, which there has been modular architectures that have been with us for years, and they have been implemented in many synthesizers as well. I would like, because of the pressure of time, to open the microphone for the audience for questions to our panelists. I would like to start.
There's a guy over there.
Come up to the microphone.
Please.
This will be a softball question.
Be careful what you
How'd you
ask.
know I was going to ask you, Chris? Could you tell us about how you left synthesis for a while and why, and maybe workstations played a part in that?
Yeah, I had the great good fortune of working at companies like Sequential and Design and Roland back in the 80s and early 90s, and I got out of synthesis for a while, early 90s, because I was interested in creating brand new sounds, and that's what we were doing, things like the Prophet VS and all these other instruments. And we went through a period in synthesizers where they became music workstations rather than instruments. It was like, how many notes did your sequencer have? And let's hear your piano sound. And that's when I lost interest in the industry, is I wanted new sounds. I didn't want to keep recreating the past. And I wandered off into the video and film world for a while doing graphics. And when I got tired of dealing with psychotic Hollywood producers after a couple decades, I said, what made me happy? And it was mucking with sound. And that's when I said, let's get back and I'm just going to get a modular, and I'm just going to go in my cave, and that's just going to play for myself, and somehow it became this big public thing. So.
Hello, thank you for the talk. My name is Salvador. I'm a computer science graduate from Cal State Long Beach, and I'm also a DJ. I know you guys mentioned starting with digital modular synthesis. I'm a beginner producer. I really don't know too much about production or really music theory at all. So is there anything that I would really be missing for my knowledge apart from the physical aspect of modular synthesis, like through a digital method?
I mean, this is something that's dear to your heart as well, but I think if you're using a software modular, you're still connecting components and learning signal flow. And it'd be pretty much the same thing. There's other reasons to use a physical modular over software one and vice versa, but in terms of learning it, if it's a modular, it's going to be the same in software as it is in hardware. It's just a matter of how you're interfacing with it. Are you mousing around? Do you have a tactile feedback? In terms of being a DJ, how visual is your performance? In Berlin right now, a lot of DJs are told, bring a modular as well. That's just not expected of them over there, for example. So.
Flashing lights always help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi guys, great panel today, great information. I'm Ralph Kinchek from Boston, studied under David for a while. But one thing I never really got into much was doing the modular stuff live. So my question is, in relation to that, if you're also using the computer, you're using sequencers and everything, how you all like match that all up to be in sync and also with the band as well?
In my particular case, my modular sequencer is actually the brain center of the entire system. Will play parts in the computer from my modular sequencer. A lot of modular equipment these days are sprouting MIDI jacks as well, believe it or not. And a lot of the sequencers and note generators can output MIDI in addition to CD gates or modulars. So in my case, my sequencer is controlling stuff inside the modular case, but it's also sending MIDI signals back down to the laptop computer to go ahead and play different presets in there. Just because Ableton Live does not like to follow other clocks that well, I have to bring the master clock from Ableton Live over USB into my modular, but then my modular distributes all the notes and information back out to everybody else. And what's also been useful for me is just breaking down this wall of what's in the laptop and what's in hardware. Some of my favorite effects are plugins, like the Valhalla plugins. Some of my favorite effects are modules. So I have a particular audio interface. In my case, I use the Expert Sleepers ES9. That has 14 channels of audio from the modular over USB into the computer, but also 8 channels from the computer back into modular signal levels. And I will loop sounds from the laptop through the modular to process it. My favorite echo chain in there is granular, but even just things like a stereo filter to go ahead and sweep stuff. So for me, they're tightly integrated, but the modular takes the lead in my system.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Hello, gentlemen. My name's Ian. I guess I just want to ask for like those of us in the younger generation, like what are some steps you would take to kind of get into modular synthesis? Like would you start with like a semi-modular and then just buy your own stuff and add on to that? Or would you like take signal from your laptop and just affect that?
I think semi-modular is a really good way to get into it because you don't need to know how to patch to get a useful sound out of it. But then they expose all the building blocks anyway, and then you can start extending your knowledge by saying, let me try patching this to that inside this machine. Oh, let me try patching to something outside of the machine. So I think semi-modulars are a really good way to learn. I've used a Mother 32 for a while. I'm using an ARP 2600M these days as my particular teaching system, as my basis. So I think that's a good way of going. But it also comes down to what you're trying to do. You can go ahead and process sounds through a modular. There's guitarists who use modular. There's accordion players who use modular because they process their machines through it. So it's basically, are you into generating notes or are you into manipulating sounds? And if you're into manipulating sounds, then get a two-way audio interface that's DC coupled so it can pass control voltages, and send audio through the modular and have fun that way. Put it on an effects send and return loop.
I gotcha. Thank you.
Hey guys, Andres from Unisound. Just quick question regarding. I'm curious what you guys recommend to like those people that are creating these awesome sounds, but then lack a way to actually market themselves and like actually sell this to people or like see where the interest actually lies. What do you recommend to these people that are basically just stuck there and then just ended the creativity side and like have this art, but then can't get it anywhere?
Social media, that's like kind of how you have to do it or guessing like play live, right? Is that kind of what you're thinking? What do you want to do exactly? You want people to hear what you're doing?
So yeah, the idea is just finding where the actual interest is and like where I guess people are going to be willing to find you for their specific needs and like willing to be paying for what you're making. I guess you could go for social media, but then it would be kind of distracting yourself from that creative aspect of like actually making the sounds, so like having to focus on building social media.
It's all distracting, you know, getting an agent and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But I just think I would just start with my friends and just see if they like it, you know, and just get something going. You got to start somewhere because it's like there's all these options, you know. I can't just say, you're right, you know, social media is a lot of enterprise to have to do. I'd start with my friends and see what's going on, and then you get people liking it and you grow it out from there and then play live. I think that's probably the easiest.
Yeah. It's a conflict I deal with too, because all the time you spend marketing your music is time away from creating music. Exactly, and it's a thing that I've struggled with to this day, is where to find that split of creating what I like, how do I share it with other people. Bandcamp has been a really good platform for a lot of independent musicians. It's trained people to pay for music rather than just to expect to stream it on a subscription for free. Live performances through Bandcamp as well, so that's a great environment. But also it just helps to, as you say, get out and play. You probably have a local scene. You probably have other synthesists in town. Start putting on gigs at pubs of electronic music. Start looking, see what other performances are happening in your area. When you've got a few gigs underneath you, start seeing if there's any music festivals or things happening with the adjacent state or whatever. Or there's probably a modular society in a state next to you. Look at their next event. Say, hey, can I drive up and be part of that? And if you're good, you're going to start getting word of mouth because people get to see you play and get to connect with you. The problem with just releasing something on Bandcamp is the old tree in the forest thing. If you don't tell anyone you have an album on Bandcamp, well, what's the point? Yeah. But performing is something that's really common with modular these days, and it is a way of starting to build a reputation.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Also, live streaming is another avenue to see.
All right, good morning, everybody, and really appreciate on the insights shared by our dear speakers, and especially a special shout out to David for founding basically the department that I am studying in, because I'm in Berklee College of Music, and the EPD, so Mr. David Mesh is basically the founder of the music synthesis department back in Berklee, and now it's called EPD, so and so as a sound designer and electronic music composer, I sometimes struggle at this case scenario where, does the sound have to mean something or have a part in the storytelling, or can the sound itself just be interesting enough, just be itself? I think that this is a rather personal question because everybody can have like a different taste. So I wonder what each of you think on that.
In a film, is that what you mean?
When you're composing, just like in general.
In general?
Yeah.
For me, it has to relate to the narrative, for sure. Like if it's a song or a film, they all have narratives. They all have some reason for being. Like if you wanted to have meaning, if you don't want it to have meaning, then you don't have to worry about this question. But I worry about this question constantly, and so I try to, connect to that narrative, and I try things, and I see if it's moving me, and if it moves me, then I'm willing to share it, and then, I test it, and I don't just know right away a lot of this stuff. I know what I want to make and how to make it, but I don't always know how it's going to work. It's just like every director doesn't have a hit film, or you don't have a hit song, or you think it might be, but you test it and you try it out. That's what I do in the real world. In my cave, I do whatever I want to do.
Okay.
There's a lot of people who play with modular synthesizers or other synthesizers or other instruments who are doing it just for their own enjoyment. I mean, if it's a cool sound, then it's made an emotional connection to you. So that's cool. Now, in my case, for composing, I agree very much that I try to have a storyline, an arc to each of my pieces that I compose. And that makes it easier to narrow down what I do. Does this sound serve the storyline? Does it serve the arc that I'm trying to get across this piece of music? But that doesn't mean that, if you just happen to enjoy a sound and it has no musical use, that you're a bad person. You can just do it for the pure enjoyment of it, and that's really good R&D just to see how to come up with sounds that move you. I mean, my own test is, does it make me start to cry? Then I'm getting somewhere.
We have 2 minutes, so perhaps the last 2 questions.
Hi, I'm Sam. I work as a live sound engineer and a producer. I had a question about the live setting using hybrid setups. Do you typically provide a sub mix, or are you outputting multiple outputs depending on what the source is? How do you provide consistent quality in your live setup so that your mixes are consistent and balanced with multiple sources?
Well, that's the art of mixing. I guess a modular producer or an electronic musician has to know how to mix a band in essence as well.
Yeah.
And that is a big component of it. And it's something that's evolving in modular. A lot of people in modular, particularly for club scenarios, just do a mono signal because they want it to be equal anywhere that someone's inside of that club, no matter whether by the left speaker or the right speaker. More advanced ones start to learn how to tune what they're doing to the room, such as having a high-pass filter to control what the subs are doing in the room. People like Steve Roach starts a sound check early in the day and spends hours in there saying, what's the echo time, what's the delay time of this room? And he will tailor his reverb and delay to the room that he's performing in. But that's a very good point. I think a lot of people miss that once you start playing more than one musical part live, you have to become a mixer now as well. Yeah. And there's a lot of modular mixing systems as well. People are underusing EQ. They need to get better about that. Yeah. And part of the seduction of synthesis is you make one really fat sound that takes the entire frequency spectrum, and then you add a second sound, and they're standing on top of each other. So like a lot of modular synthesis would benefit from taking mixing courses, I agree.
Do you limit or compress in your chain at all?
I used to limit and compress, and I didn't like what it's doing to my dynamic range. So in my case, I have taken the compressors off my system, but it's very facility friendly to have a limiter on your system going out.
Just in case.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your attendance. This was the Sound Synthesis Club panel, Modular Synthesizer. Please give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you.